Hi guys, it's Teresa. Welcome back to my channel. So as you guys might know, I do read quite a lot of thrillers, and especially recently I've been picking up a lot of them. And honestly, the more thrillers I read, the more obvious it has become to me that a lot of thrillers reuse kind of the same plot devices, the same plot twists, and therefore, the more thrillers you read, the more easily it becomes to predict a new thriller's plot twist. So for this video, I kind of wanted to boil it down to 5 major plot devices slash plot twist types that a lot of thrillers use in my experience, and kind of test them by seeing which thrillers that I have read actually include them. That will be at the end of the video. I will let you know more about that when it happens. So first, I'm gonna go through the 5 ways to predict almost any thriller plot twists. But let me preface this with 2 things. First of all, I know most of these aren't like revolutionary, not the product of like years and years of in-depth thriller studies, but basically just like based on my experiences, these things happen a lot. And if you like run through them in your mind and apply them to every thriller, you'll probably get to the answer very, very quickly. Secondly, I'm not trying to ruin the fun here. So if you're someone who really doesn't want to predict plot twists, or doesn't even want to think about the plot twist before it happens, this probably isn't the video for you. It's just kind of like a fun analysis type thing, trying to see which plot twists are more prevalent and if it's really all just the same in the end. Personally, I think a huge portion of why I love reading thrillers is the possibility that I might predict a plot twist. So I'll dedicate a lot of mental energy while reading the book to trying to figure out what the plot twist might be. And running through the steps always works. Almost always works. Like I'm almost always right. So with that being said, let's jump into the video. The first type of plot device slash plot twist is actually one I really like, because I think it adds so much more depth to a book and especially increases the rereadability of a thriller, which to begin with is kind of low by its very nature. And that is 2 characters being the same person. This is mostly done in books with multiple POVs, and usually the characters that are actually the same person have like different names. It's sometimes set at like different places, different times, that kind of thing. And then obviously by the end you find out they're the same person. I really like this one. As I said, I think it's so fun, and especially like going back to a book after you know that they were the same person, like trying to pick up on the clues that you missed the first time. I think that's really fun. And yeah, I don't mind this one at all. I think it kind of is overdone, but not to the extent of some of the others. And I still definitely appreciate this one because it almost always works unless you're really clumsy at thriller writing in general. The second one is definitely one of the most prominent ones in my opinion. This is found in almost every thriller, and I totally understand why, because it works. And that is the culprit, the perpetrator, the bad guy being someone who's very close to the main character. This works because it is really terrifying to imagine someone that you trust, that you love, that you have a close relationship with, being a bad person, doing you harm on purpose. It's scary and something almost everyone can relate to, at least in theory. And so I totally understand why this is constantly being used, even though I think it's often too obvious and like way too easy to catch on to. The third one is probably my favorite, just because yeah, I love unreliable narrators, and that is the main character slash the supposedly unsuspecting victim actually being the bad guy. There's different iterations of this, as I said, so it could be the main character that you're following, the unreliable narrator, who's actually, you know, behind all the bad stuff that's happening. Or it could be a side character that is just the victim in the beginning and discovered to be actually the bad guy. Both of these versions come up quite a lot, and I think ever since Gone Girl in particular, this one has increased quite a bit. I do enjoy it though. I think it's pretty cool, and like, if it's done well, it works well as well. That was definitely too many wells in one sentence, but okay. Number 4 is less of like a specific plot twist and more of a plot device, or like a method that is used at concealing the person that actually did it, and that is the least likely person in the book is the culprit. Like the one that isn't immediately suspected, the one that's barely mentioned, maybe only comes up on the side somewhere. A person who's never officially brought to the reader's attention in an effort to obscured their existence, their personality, or their role in the crime that occurred. I'm not trying to be mean, but in my opinion, this is a device that's kind of used more by authors who are a little bit lazy or like new to writing thrillers and kind of are too scared to reveal the culprit too soon on accident. So they like just completely erase this person from most of the story and just kind of like hint at them maybe once or twice so that there's at least some mention of them and they're not completely new, but also they're too scared to get like too close to that person, and you know, because they don't have the skills maybe to conceal their actual role in the matter. And for that reason, this is probably my least favorite, because I really like when in the book you get close to a character, or like you just have so much perceived knowledge of someone, and then on top of that you find out that they're the evil guy, and like, oh my god, it's the best. And finally, number 5, the victim that is supposed to have died is actually still alive, and or they are the perpetrator of a crime. This one is again one of my favorites just because it's so wacky and like kind of difficult to believe in real life. I still think though it works really well in thrillers because it's just such a punch in the gut to be like, oh my god, they've been alive this entire time and they're behind the entire thing. Oh, I love that. It's great. I stand by it. It might be, again, a little bit difficult to use just because it can turn really cheesy and like really, oh god, really? You're doing this again? Really quickly. At the same time, I personally enjoy it, so I don't mind. So those are the 5 scenarios that if you pick up any thriller and you basically play through each of these scenarios, you're very likely to actually land on the real plot twist in a thriller. And to test that theory, I'm gonna go through some thrillers that I have read over the years and see which category they fall into in terms of their plot twists. Now I know I don't want to ruin any books for you. So here's how we'll do this. I will show you the book cover first of the book that I'm going to be classifying their plot twist of. And in the description box, there'll be timestamps to all of these books. So if you don't want to hear about a plot twist of a specific book that you still want to read, that you haven't read yet, then jump to another one that you have read, basically. So I get that not everyone is going to be able to watch this entire video. And that's kind of sad, but I don't know any other way to do this while still being able to like openly talk about the plot twist in these books. So this is the compromise that I've come up with, and I hope you guys don't mind and don't accidentally spoiler yourselves. That would really suck. Okay, so here we go. I have compiled a list of 23 thrillers that I've read over the years. This is kind of an arbitrary list because I don't have any rhyme or reason to the thrillers that I do pick up, and there's a lot I haven't read yet, so bear with me on that. But the first one on this list is Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough. So this book is kind of different, obviously, because of the paranormal element of it, but I still think it classifies as a category 1, 2 people being the same person, considering that Rob has actually basically taken over, is it Addie's body? And so Rob and Addie are the same person, right? This is kind of like a twist on this trope, which I really appreciate, and this is one of the very few thrillers where I actually enjoyed the paranormal element to it. So this is definitely one that I really enjoyed nonetheless. Like, it is a kind of often used plot twist, but it still really worked. So thumbs up to this one. Next I have Pines by Blake Crouch, or generally Wayward Pines trilogy. This is a sci-fi thriller, and I kind of tried to steer clear of them, so I haven't included any other books by Blake Crouch. But this one I wanted to mention because, in my opinion, it's one of the biggest plot twists ever and the best one I've ever read. And this one doesn't fit into any of the categories, surprisingly. That's probably because it's not a straight up thriller, or the thriller aspect isn't the biggest focus of the book, so it didn't need to fall back on any of these on the list, and kind of had like a more organic plot twist that really suited that particular story. Definitely did not see that coming. Next I have An Anonymous Girl by Greer, Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen, and for this one I couldn't actually pinpoint what category the book plot twist was going to fall into, because in my opinion it doesn't really have one. There are some like weird revelations, but none of them are like, oh my god, this is the one big plot twist of the book. And even though it doesn't fall into any of the categories, so it could be considered more original than some of the other books on this list, I hated this book, so I just thought it was boring, not very thrilling, not very suspenseful. So next is My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing, and for this one I struggled a little bit because of the setup of the book itself, since it does follows like self-proclaimed and like proven murderers. it's not that surprising, in my opinion, when one of them turns out to be like a bad person, because they kind of were from the beginning. And so the most I could do is put it into category 2 of someone who's very close to the main character being the bad guy, which is obviously his wife. But since he himself is also a bad guy, I guess this kind of only halfway counts for that category, because yeah, it's just like kind of a mess. The entire book is a mess. And so yeah, it does fit into the system a little bit, but not fully. Then we have The Breakdown by B.E. Paris, another thriller I definitely did not enjoy. That also fits into category number 2 in terms of the plot twist. So the main character's husband and her best friend are the bad guys, so it's kind of like a double category 2 case. Next, we have one of my favorite books of all time, and that's I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Iain Reid. I keep talking about this thriller. Everybody has to read it, so please, if you haven't done so, don't watch the spoilery section. Thank you very much. But this one definitely falls into the category 1. This is definitely a twist on that particular plot device, because there is this element of like confusion on the main character's part that's involved. That isn't usually the case with this. Usually it just serves to deceive the reader and not necessarily something that the characters involved actually believe. Like in this book, they actually believe themselves to be a separate person. So that is very unique. And even though it falls into a fixed category, it's one of the best books I've ever read, and a plot twist I definitely could not predict. The next book I have is The Girl in 6E by A.R. Torre. In my opinion, this is another book that's kind of different because of its premise. Because again, the main character is a self-proclaimed killer. And so, you know, no one in this book is really a nice person for the most part. And it's actually more a mystery than a thriller, so there isn't really this sort of hitting close to home type of sense that you often get in thrillers, where it's like, oh my god, this is happening to me. In this case, it's just like the main character solving a crime that's kind of not related to her that much. So again, this is a book that doesn't really fall into any of the plot twist categories by nature of like its different setup, and like it's just trying to achieve a different goal basically. Then we have Black Eyed Susans by Julia Heaberlin. With this book I struggled kind of a bit. I actually had to do some research because I forgot about most of what happened in the story, and even then I couldn't find a properly like spoilery description, so I'm not sure what to classify this as. I think it's a 2 if at all, because I think one of her best friends is actually kind of involved, at least to some extent. She's not the bad guy per se, but she's involved, so it's halfway a category 2, but kind of not. So you decide if this counts or not. I leave it to you. Oh, where from property fries? This is turning into a mukbang. Next we have We Were Liars by E. Lockhart, a YA thriller. The plot twist for this I think falls into a category 3, where basically the main character is behind all the bad things that happened, at least to some extent. It definitely has a twist to it because you know, the people that she thought were still alive are actually not alive anymore. So it's definitely a little bit different, and I did not predict this one at the time of reading it, and I really enjoyed this book, but definitely I would say a category 3. Then we have Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty, which I would say is a category 1. I think the biggest plot twist here is obviously Perry and like the guy that the main character had a bad time with, that like raped her, I think, are the same person. So that to me was the biggest plot twist, more so than who killed him, because like honestly everybody wanted to, rightfully so. I think it actually worked really well in this book, and I don't think I saw it coming. Next is I Know You Know by Gilly Macmillan. This is another 3 because obviously Colin, the person who's doing the podcast, is the one who actually killed his friends at that time. I didn't actually enjoy this book mainly because of the ending, I think, if I remember correctly, but still, I did not predict the plot twist itself as far as I can remember. Then we have The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins. This is kind of difficult, again, to put into a category in my opinion. If pressed to do so, I'd say it's a 4 because man who actually committed the crime was like one of the least likely person. Like everybody else was played up more to be the culprit kind of thing instead of the guy who actually did it. But I wouldn't necessarily say that he's like a fringe figure that's barely touched on. And also, I don't think that that was like the biggest plot twist of the book. There were like all these kind of small revelations that were at least as important. So I think kind of more important was like the whole thing of like her being gaslit by her husband. So yeah, you decide. But I'd actually say that this one doesn't have a big plot twist that falls into the 5 categories. Then we have I Let You Go by Clare Mackintosh. I think in this case, it is a 3 in a sense, but again, with a twist. We obviously think that the person that we follow throughout most of the book is like the mother of the victim, but instead she's the one who murdered him. So this is not a case where the character is just basically going about her normal life and like pretending to be a victim while she's not. Instead, it's more like turned towards deceiving the reader and like keeping the reader in the dark, which is a little bit different in my opinion. Then we have Gone Girl by Gilly and Flynn, which is obviously the most apparent 3 in my opinion. I think this is actually the book that like sparked the trend of like doing that a lot more frequently, where the supposed victim is actually the bad guy and like flipping it all on its head. And this is definitely one of the books that did it best in my opinion, because it was one of the first, or even the first in my experience, that did it. Then we have Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn, which I would probably say is like a 2. So someone who's very close to the victim who perpetrated the crime, because it's like her mother. But then again, this is a much more complex book than just a straight up thriller. It deals with a lot more like different issues, you know what I mean? So I wouldn't say that this is like the driving force, like discovering the culprit is like the driving force of the book. And so I wouldn't necessarily even put it in any of the categories, but if I had to, it would be a 2. Then we have Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. I don't think this one fits into any of the categories very well, because again, similar to Sharp Objects, this is a book that has so many like complex things going on where it's really difficult to pinpoint and be like, this is the plot twist, or like this is the revelation. And it's not so like focused in its direction of storytelling as a lot of straight up thrillers are, so this is difficult to classify and I wouldn't try to do so actually. Then we have Before I Go to Sleep by S.G. Watson, one of the very first thrillers I read that completely blew me away. This is a prime case of category 2 where the culprit is someone who's very close to the victim. It's obviously the main character's husband who's trying to like gaslight her and deceive her and actually try to pretend to be her husband while not actually being her husband. So definitely, again, I think one of the first books I read that fell into this category and that brought my attention to this plot device, I would say. And at the time, I really appreciated it. Now, I'm a little bit more suspicious from the get-go, and I probably wouldn't be caught unawares by this plot twist anymore. Next is In a Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Ware. This was a very recent read of mine, and while I did find the plot twist to be kind of predictable, because it does fall actually into 2 of these categories, I still really enjoyed the book, so what can you say? Sometimes level of predictability isn't always indicative of enjoyment of the thriller itself. I would say this book falls into categories 2 and 3, so the culprit is someone who's close to the main character, and also the person who's believed to be a victim is actually not a victim, but the perpetrator. In this case, the main character's best friend who's like, oh no, my husband has died, but actually she's the one who sort of set him up to be killed. Again, this book isn't one that like super hinges on its plot twist. I think this is more like atmospheric and like has a lot of other stuff going for it, but I put it into both of these categories in terms of the plot twist. The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager is a thriller I actually did not enjoy, but I will say the plot twist is pretty good. It's a category 5, the only one on this list, and I loved it in this case. For some reason, I really enjoyed it, like just pure enjoyment wise. This was great. The person that you believe to be killed and dead and the victim is actually still alive and is the one who did the killing. As I said, this is kind of like a difficult one to pull off just because it can turn really cheesy and like, oh no, so lazy, of course. Dead people aren't dead after all. Nobody likes that most of the time. But I think it worked in this book. Then we have The Kyneworth Killing by Peter Swanson. This book has a lot of twists and turns, but I think the biggest one is the category 1 plot twist where we find out that Faith and I think Miranda are the same person, because it like kind of sets everything else into motion, in my opinion. I think this was also the only part of the plot twist that I didn't see coming in this book. Like everything else from then onwards I found a lot more predictable than this one, so that's why I picked it to be like the big representative plot twist for this book. Then we have Lock Every Door by Riley Sager, another fairly recent read of mine. This is a category 2, fair and square. The main character's like close friend slash lover boy, this doctor, is actually a bad guy. Like, most of the characters in this book are kind of bad guys, but like, he's one of the top bad guys. Second to last, we have The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. This is kind of difficult again to pinpoint, because again, there's like a lot of different plot twists going on. To me, like, one of the biggest ones is a category 1. So the main character is actually also another person. It's again kind of a twist on the like stereotypical iteration of this twist, because the character that she is also isn't like someone who's actually like, whose point of view we're actually reading from, but just like, oh, actually I'm your daughter type of thing. Like Darth Vader, I'm your father kind of thing. So like, gun to my head, if I had to put this in a category, it would be category 1. But also I think this book has actually like none of the like typical hallmarks of any of the 5 that we're talking about today. And finally, The Good Daughter by Karin, which actually wouldn't put into any of these categories, again, because it's a much more complex story than the typical like linear focus of a thriller. And so there isn't like one big revelation. It's like a lot of different things that are coming up, and like you're constantly learning new things and putting the puzzle together. And there's like one thing that's like, oh my God, this is it. There's like an actual twist. It's kind of just like a story that's being told, that there are revelations in it, but it's not like, oh my God, did not see that coming type of thing. And so now that we have categorized all of these thrillers, I think it's time to like take a little tally and see how prevalent these categories actually were throughout these kind of random 23 thrillers that I just mentioned. And so I think that this is like a segment that everyone can watch again, because I'm not talking about specific books anymore. I'm just talking about like prevalence among this like really small and definitely not representative sample size. So according to this very scientific research that we have done together now, the most prevalent category is number 2. I have 7 thrillers that fall into this category, meaning the most prominent plot twist here is that the culprit was someone who's very close to the main character. Again, I'm not surprised this is so common because of the effect that it does have, and it just works well. Like, everyone's freaked out by this, and it's also kind of easy to do and like a good starting off point for people who are like getting into thriller writing. Also, like, you don't want the culprit to be someone who's completely unconnected from the main character that we're following, because like, what's the point? There has to be like some sort of thing to make this relevant, right? So I totally get why this is so prevalent, and I think it's good. This is a common way that people tell their thrillers. Then we have actually a tie for place 2 between category 1 and category 3. So 2 characters actually being the same person, and the main character slash the victim actually being the perpetrator, have both like 5 thrillers. Again, I can totally see why these are really cool and fun things to pull off if you can pull them off. Especially the 2 characters being the same person. I'm a sucker for that. I like that a lot. 4 of the thrillers that I talked about today actually in none of the 5 categories, which is nice. They're a breath of fresh air. They're like doing something different. Most of these actually don't have like one specific plot twist that I could find. So that's why they couldn't be put into a category. It's not because the plot twist in them is like something completely different, like a potential 6th category. It's really just because they don't have a representative plot twist that I could personally find. And then at the bottom of the list, we have categories 4 and 5, each with 1 thriller that falls into them. Category 4, if you forgot, is the culprit being someone who's kind of like forgotten about in the story, who's someone that is like, you're like actively sort of turned away from by making them seem as like inconsequential as possible. And then category 5 is the victim who's supposed to be dead, actually still being alive and being the actual perpetrator. I do wish this category 5 was a little bit more prevalent, because I personally think it's really cool, but I do see why it's so rare, because it's difficult to pull off and can turn really cheesy really quickly. But I think in conclusion, we can say that like, these are definitely 5 categories of thriller plot twists that are extremely prevalent, and that a lot of thriller writers keep falling back on. And I understand, you know, nowadays readers have read so much, readers know so much, that it's really, really difficult to come up with something new. Like, everything's been written before, everything's been done before. And I totally understand why it's like really, really difficult to tell a compelling, well-written, punch in the gut type of thriller while not falling back on established patterns. Still, I do kind of wish that some authors at least would branch out a little bit more, not make every thriller kind of follow a very similar formula, just with different like window dressing. I wish there was something more, like something like Gone Girl that really changed the game and like set a new precedent. But so far I haven't really come across anything like that. The closest thing to me would actually be a mystery, and that's the Seven Deaths in Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. I think that definitely did its own thing. And it's very different in a really good way, but it's a mystery, it's not a thriller. And I just wish that there was something that's like new within the thriller world that we could get our teeth into, and that would actually be surprising. As I said earlier, I don't think that predictability and enjoyment of a thriller are necessarily mutually exclusive. I think there's a lot of thrillers that I've seen the ending coming and I still enjoyed the ride. But where I have a problem is when the thriller hinges on a plot twist. Like, that's the main thing it has going for it, that's the main thing it's focused on, the main thing that's supposed to get the reader invested, and then that is like an easily predictable plot twist, and other than that the book doesn't really have anything to recommend it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun making it, and I hope you also bear with me a little bit because I'm sure I made some mistakes somewhere along the way. This is obviously extremely subjective. It's just like my little system that I've come up with kind of on the fly. This isn't something that can be applied to obviously everything, and like it's not foolproof, none of that. So if you have any additions, amendments, corrections that you'd like to make, please do so in the comments down below. I'd love to know what you think about thrillers, thriller writing, if you are someone who's very good at predicting plot twists, or you kind of try not to even think about that and like just enjoy the ride for what it is. I'd love to know. Leave it down below. I hope to see you guys back very soon with another video. Until then, have a lovely week. Bye!